Okay, here we go. I'm going to show you how easy it is to make this fitted face mask. So print out your pattern pieces, get them on cardstock if you can, because it's just going to make it a lot easier to trace. You have your fabric, right sides together. And if you're using a solid, like I said, you don't have to worry too much about how they're matching up, but just lay it down, trace them out, as many or as few as you want to do. Think of these in pairs. You need 2 of them. So that was 1, and this is 2. And then you cut those 2 pieces out. So we'll move on to the sewing part. We're going to do these gray ones that I've already cut out. Now you have your 2 pairs. We're going to sew along the long curved edge, sewing machine and straight stitch, and just sew. Both pieces, right sides together. Since you cut them that way, you don't have to move them at all, and you don't have to pin them because they'll stick to each other well enough. Okay, now we're going to do a little bit of pressing. We're going to make each side like this, just on one side. I'm going to show you that in just a second at the ironing board. Okay, so here are 2 pairs we've sewn together along the curved edge. And for right now, I'm not going to worry about that curved edge at all. If you want, you can clip it like the other video did, but it's not necessary right now. What we're going to think about right now is pressing back one side of each of our pairs. And this is going to be important because this is going to allow you to keep one side, it's going to allow you to turn it right side out when you're done, but also it's going to allow you to keep one side open in case you want a filter pocket, which some people are wanting. You're going to have the option to sew it closed or not sew it closed at the end. So the important thing is just do one side, not both, and make sure that you've got them laid out the opposite way, because these guys are going to go together like that. So now that you've got your 2 pieces, you've got one edge pressed in almost a 1/2 inch, and the other side, that edge is pressed in almost a 1/2 inch. Now we're going to sew the 2 pieces together. Okay, so we're ready to sew these 2 pieces together. Now here's where, if you were a beginner and you wanted to pin it, you could. I don't find it's necessary. This fabric is easy to work with. All I need to do to start is to take your 2 pressed corners, and we're looking at the top of the nose curve is going to be the first thing we sew. So right sides together, just pinch in between your fingers, get them under the presser foot, and get your needle down. Now, I don't need to pin it because at this point I'm just going to grab my seams, make sure I'm lining up the edges carefully, and it just comes together super easy all by itself. So we're just going to start to sew it. I'm using the edge of my presser foot as a seam allowance guide because I don't want to waste too much fabric. So I'm just using the edge of the fabric along my foot to guide me along. So we're going to sew. When you get up to the seam, you might want to lift your foot and just adjust the fabric so that you don't have any wrinkles underneath. So you are going around a curve, so sometimes the fabric will get wrinkled underneath if you're not careful. Line it up, super easy. I've got my fingers on the next corner and we're going to keep sewing. Stop, and then we're going to turn and go down this straight side. Line it up, super easy. Again, coming down to the corner. Turn again. I'm going to grab this seam, line it up with my fingers and hold it. Sew some more. And now I'm going to grab the end. It's folded, folds together so it comes out nice and even in the end. And I'll hold on to that just as I let the fabric go through. Back stitch at the end. Okay, now the piece is together on both sides. The next step we're going to do is we're going to cut all of the seam allowance. This is why I like to have my pinking shears. It's especially good along the curves because it takes the bulk out, and the pinking shears will now prevent the fabric from fraying. So you don't have to do this. It's not going to make a huge difference in the look of the final product, but if you don't clip all of your seam allowances, do clip the corners, because right now there's a lot of bulk in there and it's not going to turn inside out and give you a nice corner unless you clip it in pretty close. So whether you want to go around and do the whole thing like I'm doing, or you want to just be careful to clip your corners, it's up to you. I like the pinking shears because they make it super easy, and they also get all these little threads cleaned up at the same time. So this is what we have now. It's time to turn it inside out. So now you've got this side that's open because we pressed it and we did not sew it. We're going to just turn it inside out. And I like to use this little bone folder, but you know, anything that you have that's pointy, that's not going to poke through the fabric, is going to work. I like to get my corner, you know, pretty good, and then go along my edges and kind of just crease it with my fingers so that it stays. I'm going to end up going around the thing with top stitching, which is again not completely necessary, but the reason I'm doing that is because we want people to wash these masks, and when you wash them, you know, they kind of are going to lose a little bit of the shape, this pristine shape, when they're brand new. So when you add the top stitching, you're just kind of giving it one more way for the fabric to stay in shape. So this is what the thing looks like. And we haven't done anything to that seam, pressed it or anything, but it doesn't matter. As you can see, it looks just fine. The other thing I want to say to you too is if you're using a stripe or a plaid, you should make sure when you cut the pattern you do it at an angle so that it comes together with, you know, it's not straight up and down. When you do it straight up and down, it just kind of looks a little goofy. So be mindful of that. Now we're going to sew around the top stitching. And to do that, I'm going to start, what I want to do is I want to start, this is the edge that's we have sewed together, and this is the edge that we have not sewn together. Now, if you want a filter pocket, you're not ever going to sew this edge together, and that's fine. What I'm going to do right now is I am going to sew the edge together. So I'm going to start at this top corner, and I'm going to sew down around here and up over the nose, and then stop right here. So I'm going to show you right now. And this top stitching, so it's close, like 1/8 of an inch. It's close to the edge of the fabric. And as you're going along, just make sure that you've got the fold neatly and as open as possible, or as close to the seam as possible. And sometimes the machine wants to get a little bit stuck as you go over that seam. That's okay. Just be a little bit careful and maybe give it a little bit of a tug if you have to. If you're using light cotton fabric, it shouldn't be too much of a problem. So here's our edge that's open, and we're going to now sew it closed. Again, if you want a filter pocket, you're not going to sew that edge. You're going to leave it and only sew top stitching along the top and along the bottom. Now we're going to come along the top, be a little gentle over the nose, and then coming down the side. And I don't need to turn here because there's already a seam, and it's probably just not all that necessary. Okay, so this is it. It's all sewn together. All we need to do now is elastic. So my elastic is this waistband elastic that I was telling you I'm cutting out of these men's pajama bottoms. This thick elastic is super easy to cut down. You can see that it's got little lines on it. You just take your scissors and cut straight, you know, little strips, and you end up with stuff like this. So I'm going to grab a couple strips of elastic. These are, like I said in the pattern, these are 7 inches long because this is a size medium. So here's where you do need to do some pinning. And what I do is I fold I fold the end of the elastic over because I don't want it to fray. And with it folded over like this, I take one of my little straight pins and I stick it in there so it's going to stay. Now don't twist the elastic, do the same thing on the other side, fold it over. It's a little bit fiddly when you first start doing this, but if you do it a couple times, I'll try and show you. If you do it a couple times, it'll get a little bit easier as I struggle. I promise it gets easier. All right, so it looks like that. You do both sides. And then we're going to sew it with a zigzag stitch. So I'm going to change my thread and change my machine settings and then come back and show you how to do the zigzag stitch on the elastic. Okay, so now I've changed my top thread to white and the bottom thread is still gray, and that's because the elastic's white, so I want the thread that shows up on this side to be white and the thread that shows up on this side to be gray. You don't have to do that. You can use whatever color you want. If you have a limited amount of thread, that's fine. So then we have to change our settings to zigzag stitch. So I'm going to come over here. Your machine is going to be different to just kind of figure out how to do your zigzag stitch. I'm going to do the widest possible. And then down here for the stitch length, I'm going to set it just under 2. Now, get your foot centered on that little spot where you want to sew it. Get your needle in, and pull the pin. Now, sometimes there's a little bit of a bubble because the elastic is kind of bulky. Sometimes I just kind of raise the presser foot up, make sure that it's not going to get caught in the foot. Occasionally it gets caught in the foot. So now we're just going to go back and forth a few times just to make it nice and secure. And then we'll do the other side. Oh, I'm going to lose that thread, aren't I? Yep. One more time. Pull the pin. You don't want to run over the pin. You might break your needle. And back and forth a few times. Okay, so I'm going to do the elastic on the other side real quick. I'm going to trim all of my threads on the front and back, and you will see the finished face mask. And I'll just put it on and show you how it fits. Yep. Okay, so that's it. It's all done. We've sewed the elastic on both sides. This is the side that I call the back, but you could wear it either way because it kind of looks finished, even though the elastic is sewn on that side. And then we're just going to put it on. Rubber that use. It's great. Easy.